This is a recording of the International Communist Party, which maintains its direct line running from Marx to Lenin to the foundation of the Third International and the birth of the Communist Party of Italy in Leghorn, Livorno, 1921, and from there to the struggle of the Italian communist left against the degeneration in Moscow and to the rejection of popular fronts and coalitions of resistance groups. Today we will be reading from our index on Organic Centralism, Part 2, of Lenin the Organic Centralist, Organic Centralism in Lenin, the Left, and the Actual Life of the Party, from 2021. 26. The Reversal of Praxis. Returning to Lenin, at this point it is worthwhile to dwell on the relationship between the spontaneous movement of the proletariat and the party, between material drives that arise spontaneously within society and revolutionary theoretical elaboration, between spontaneity and consciousness. They fail to understand that the ideologist is worthy of the name only when he precedes the spontaneous movement, points out the road, and is able ahead of all others to solve all the theoretical, political, tactical, and organizational questions which the material elements of the movement spontaneously encounter. To say, however, that ideologists, i.e. politically conscious leaders, read the party, cannot divert the movement from the path determined by the interaction of environment and elements is to ignore the simple truth that the conscious element participates in this interaction and in the determination of the path. 5.316. In our reversal of praxis concept that the party enunciated at its inception, according to which the class party receives all stimuli and impulses emanating from the class and its immediate organizations, it draws from this raw material for the elaboration of its doctrine, and then reflects these back to the class and to the individual worker. Within certain limits, according to the situations and the balance of class relationships, the party may take decisions and initiatives and influence the development of the struggle. The dialectical relationship lies in the fact that inasmuch as the Revolutionary Party is a conscious and voluntary factor of events, it is also a result of the same, and of the conflict they represent between old and new modes of production. This is a function that would disappear if material ties with the social environment and the class struggle were interrupted. 27. The invariant tactical plan. The party has reiterated this perspective, for example, in 1967, the continuity of action of the party on the thread of the left's tradition, Il Programma Comunista, number 3 through 5, 1967. It is striking how for us, not only are the problems of organization and functioning of the Marxist Revolutionary Party intertwined with the fundamental questions of doctrine, program, and tactics, but also that the correct solution of the former is prejudicial to the correct setting and solution of the latter. Obviously, that the party is a product of the environment in which it operates does not mean that the theory should be subjected to ups and downs according to the external situation. It is obvious that, while our party is a factor in events, it is at the same time a product of them. This is also the case if we succeed in creating a really revolutionary world party. Now, in which sense are events reflected in this party? In the sense that the number of our members increases, and our influence on the masses grows, when the crisis of capitalism engenders a situation favorable to us. If, on the contrary, at a given moment the situation becomes unfavorable, it may well be that our forces get reduced in number, but when that occurs we must not allow our ideology to suffer from it. Not just our tradition and our organization, but also our political line must remain intact. Third Communist International, 6th Enlarged Executive, report by the Left of the Communist Party of Italy, 5th Session, February 23, 1926. Continuing to point out how the party must work, and starting from the observations of the economists, Lenin shows that there is no contradiction between the two statements made about Iskra. Social democracy does not tie its hands, it does not restrict its activities to some one preconceived plan or method of political struggle. It recognizes all methods of struggle, provided they correspond to the forces at the disposal of the party, and facilitate the achievement of the best results possible under the given conditions. 4.371. And, without a strong organization skilled in waging political struggle under all circumstances and at all times, there can be no question of that systematic plan of action, illumined by firm principles and steadfastly carried out, which alone is worthy of the name of tactics. 5.18. Thus, a tactical plan is nothing more than describing what the party's attitude must be in given situations. The party must work, and this is the fundamental theoretical work of the party, to foresee the most varied scenarios in which it may find itself operating, not only the party as a whole, but also the individual militant, who may have to make important operational decisions in conditions where connections with the center has been broken. The fundamental error committed by the new trend in Russian social democracy is its bowing to spontaneity and its failure to understand that the spontaneity of the masses demands a high degree of consciousness from us social democrats. The greater the spontaneous upsurge of the masses and the more widespread the movement, the more rapid, incomparably so, the demand for greater consciousness in the theoretical, political, and organizational work of social democracy. 5. 396. Consciousness means knowledge, and it is exactly in this sense that Lenin means the term. Knowledge of the bourgeois world, in its politics, in its economy, in its culture, to be able to foresee the situations in which the party will find itself, to give indications of struggle to the working class. We, his humble students, have learned from him the need to work on the sculpting of theory and on the prediction of tactics to be adopted in the most varied possible situations. This is the purpose of work with comrades, which periodically, at our general meetings, is presented to the whole of the party, a job that serves not only to know what to do in certain circumstances. Its importance is above all in sharing with all the comrades who will know how to use it in a revolutionary sense, and in a continuous formation of the new militants who get to acquire our doctrine in a natural way, rather than ridiculous party schools. It would be nonsense to claim they are perfect texts, irrevocable and unchangeable, as we wrote in the 1966 Naples Theses, because over the years the party has always said that it was material under continuous elaboration, destined to assume an ever better and more complete form. However, these texts return periodically, with new data and new clarifications, to the principles that are the basis of our doctrine, without ever contradicting them in the slightest. In this way, militants, through participation in periodic meetings, local and general, are always in contact with our positions, and are comfortable making them their own. It is an ancient conviction of ours that a strong party is one whose militants, in a given situation, all behave in the same way, even if they have no possibility of communicating with each other and with the center. Such is, however, the tradition of Marxism. The General Council feels proud of the prominent part the Paris branches of the International have taken in the glorious revolution of Paris, not, as the imbeciles fancy, as if the Paris or any other branch of the International received its mot d'ordre from a center, but the flower of the working class in all civilized countries belonging to the International, and being imbued with its ideas, they are sure everywhere in the working class movement to take the lead. Second draft of the Civil War in France, Marx and Engels, 22, 545. Theory is a single block, as we have already written, which does not change but is sculpted, is always better defined. The tactic, on the other hand, is the provision of scenarios in which the party's response may have different implications, in the presence of events that are difficult to predict in detail. Obviously, the tactical choices depend on knowledge of the data related to the various situations. Over time, and with the accumulation of knowledge on the basis of an ever-increasing record of struggle experiences, the space for tactical choices is reduced, and there are behaviors that from the technical level, which offers choices, border on general theory, which is dogmatic and untouchable. This is the case often cited of participation in political elections in countries with mature capitalism. The choice was legitimately posed until the 1920s, even if for the left sufficient experience already existed to reject it. Today our doctrine excludes it as a position on which there can be no doubt, a position that is part of our general theory. Lenin did not believe that he had exhausted the spontaneity consciousness argument, as the misunderstanding is very rooted in the socialist movement, not only in Russia and, we add, not only in 1902. So the third chapter, Trade Unionist Politics and Social Democratic Politics, is still dedicated to the controversy with the economists, a subject that actually allows the establishment of precise boundaries to the activity of revolutionaries, clarifying their role in a situation of double revolution, where the bourgeois democratic revolution is still to be done. 28. Economic struggle and political struggle. The defense of the economic conditions of the working class is a necessary task. but it cannot be considered, as the economists did, the exclusive one. It is its school of warfare. The danger, then as now, is that by focusing on sacrosanct activities, but in an exclusive way, one forgets the fundamental political tasks of the revolutionary socialist struggle. Social democracy leads the struggle of the working class, not only for better terms for the sale of labor power, but for the abolition of the social system that compels the propertyless to sell themselves to the rich. Social democracy represents the working class, not in its relation to a given group of employers alone, but in its relation to all classes of modern society and to the state as an organized political force. Hence, it follows that not only must social democrats not confine themselves exclusively to the economic struggle, but that they must not allow the organization of economic exposures to become the predominant part of their activities. We must take up actively the political education of the working class and the development of its political consciousness. 400. A consciousness that must include, in Russia, the struggle to bring down the autocratic regime. The struggle for social reforms, quite important for the working class, is one of the duties of social democracy, which, however, subordinates the struggle for reforms, as the part to the whole, to the revolutionary struggle for freedom and for socialism. 406. The party therefore not only elaborates a program and a tactics to bring it to fruition, but it also evaluates, depending on the historical moment, what is the main activity on which to commit its resources and those of the class. Lenin always reminded proletarians in the factory that without a political change of state power, their conditions would not improve significantly, and that this improvement would only be consolidated by the political victory of their party, which would manage power in their name, up to a classless society. Lenin never tired of insisting on support for a broader political agitation to avoid a relapse into economic rearguardism. Class political consciousness can be brought to the workers only from without, that is, only from outside the economic struggle, from outside the sphere of relations between workers and employers. To bring political knowledge to the workers, the Social Democrats must go among all classes of the population. They must dispatch units of their army in all directions. The Social Democrats' ideal should not be the trade union secretary, but the tribune of the people. 422 to 423. What counts in hammering home the point that takes up most of the pamphlet is not so much the contingent polemic, a polemic which in any case might need to be resurrected even today, when within rank-and-file movements economist-type attitudes continue to resurface. What is important to note here is that Lenin, the supposed tactician, the allegedly astute navigator between congresses and currents, does not use half-words, does not rely on politicians' subtle words, but brands as bourgeois in no uncertain terms all that is not socialist and revolutionary. Trade unionist politics of the working class is precisely bourgeois politics of the working class. 426. He then goes on to describe the tasks of the Social Democrats in Russia, in that historical period, tasks that also include democratic objectives, but always calling them such, always distinguishing the activity of the party from that of other organizations, always, finally, clearly recalling what the party's ultimate goals are, even when it speaks to the other classes and social strata: peasants, students, clergy, artisans. 29. Workers' organisms and the Communist Party. In the fourth chapter, The Primitiveness of the Economists and the Organization of the Revolutionaries, Lenin starts off by trying to explain the meaning of the term primitivism, retracing the recent history of social democratic circles, and demonstrating how these have always been persecuted, and therefore destroyed, by the police, precisely because of a primitive, amateurish approach to the work, and does not hesitate to associate the economists with this typology, who are primitive in that they underestimate the political and organizational tasks of the social democratic movement. Therefore, it is necessary to refer to the theoretical and organizational cornerstones of a revolutionary party based on the working class. First, we need to distinguish between workers' organization and the organization of revolutionaries. The workers' organizations for the economic struggle should be trade union organizations. Every social democratic worker should, as far as possible, assist and actively work in these organizations. But, while this is true, it is certainly not in our interest to demand that only social democrats should be eligible for membership in the trade unions, since that would only narrow the scope of our influence upon the masses. Let every worker who understands the need to unite for the struggle against the employers and the government join the trade unions. The very aim of the trade unions would be impossible of achievement if they did not unite all who have attained at least this elementary degree of understanding, if they were not very broad organizations. The broader these organizations, the broader will be our influence over them, an influence due not only to the spontaneous development of the economic struggle, but to the direct and conscious effort of the socialist trade union members to influence their comrades. 5. 454. So the trade union, because it is nothing else when it comes to corporative associations, must be composed only of workers. The social democratic workers must work there, but it is not to be expected that there will be political unanimity within it. This sacrosanct principle, which as Lenin explains allows for very large and strong unions, then creates a particularly favorable environment for the revolutionary worker to carry out his propaganda. Those were years in which the mirage of revolutionary syndicalism was arising, in France, Sorel, in Italy, in South America, in the USA, IWW, an experiment that after a couple of decades would reveal its failure, but one that plagued the labor movement, preventing or making difficult the development of revolutionary parties of Marxist faith. Lenin predicted this degeneration of the movement, which could arise precisely from the economists. As for the regime unions, like the ones famously promoted by Sergei Zubotov, he was not worried. Keep at it, gentlemen. Do your best. Whenever you place a trap in the path of the workers, either by way of direct provocation or by the honest demoralization of the workers with the aid of Struvism, we will see to it that you are exposed. But whenever you take a real step forward, though it be the most timid zigzag, we will say, "Please continue." And the only step that can be a real step forward is a real, if small, extension of the workers' field of action. Every such extension will be to our advantage, and will help to hasten the advent of legal societies of the kind in which it will not be agents provocateurs who are detecting socialists, but socialists who are gaining adherents. 5. 456. Therefore, if these governmental regime unions want some following among the workers, they will have to show that they deserve it, although they must do this within the law. But in doing so, they create favorable conditions for the revolutionary and union activity of the Social Democrats. Moreover, workers who constitute secret trade unions will also have to be helped, because the true struggle, even in trade unions, requires clandestine activity. This too is a fundamental task of the revolutionaries. The important thing is not to talk to the workers in a generic, unrealistic, or improvised way. It would be demagogy, says Lenin, and in the long run this would alienate us from the proletarian esteem. The speaker must know what he's talking about. Both the trade union and the political struggle require organization, but the two spheres are very different, and so are the methods of organization, and not just in a police regime like that at the beginning of the 20th century in Russia. The party must rely on professional revolutionaries, not amateur politicians, and in this way it will be better defended against police persecutions, and its propaganda and agitation will be truly effective. The necessity of illegality leads to the centralization of clandestine work, but this by no means implies centralization of all the functions of the movement. 5. 465. The party in this sense does not give itself fixed schematic rules, but adapts its organization to the conditions in which it operates. 30. Workers and intellectuals in the party. It is therefore a question of forming revolutionaries, but we must also be able to draw from the ranks of the class, and not only from the intellectuals. Our very first and most pressing duty is to help to train working-class revolutionaries who will be on the same level in regard to party activity, for, although necessary, it is neither so easy nor so pressingly necessary to bring the workers up to the level of intellectuals in other respects. Attention, therefore, must be devoted principally to raising the workers to the level of revolutionaries. It is not at all our task to descend to the level of the working masses, as the economists wish to do. 5. 470. Lenin always recognized that, from an organizational point of view, the role of the living working class is decisive, a class that, for objective economic reasons, distinguishes itself from the others in capitalist society through its aptitude for organization. What is to be done stresses that without the contact with the working class, the organization of revolutionaries would have been a toy, an adventure, an empty symbol, and that only when there is a truly revolutionary class that spontaneously rises to the struggle does the organization that the party advocates for the moment of proletarian assault make sense. But to do this, we need real persons who are dedicated to creating this organization. Revolutionaries by profession, true militants, disciplined and not blowhards, a vanguard rooted in the class and able to direct it. These are the members of the party for Lenin. Beyond the contingent situations, Lenin fights against opportunism in organizational matters. Party members must not be talkative, i.e. revolutionary in words, but rather militants who do not just participate in the movement from time to time when they have the desire to go to meetings on free evenings. 31. Conspiracy and terrorism. Even terrorism, which was still gaining support, was associated with the spontaneist swamp. The economists and the present-day terrorists have one common root, namely subservience to spontaneity. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and in this case, good intentions cannot save one from being spontaneously drawn along the line of least resistance. Here again the concept we always shared. Calls for terror and calls to lend the economic struggle itself a political character are merely two different forms of evading the most pressing duty now resting upon Russian revolutionaries, namely, the organization of comprehensive political agitation. 5. 418, 420. Against the apostles of conspiracy, Lenin is explicit. We have always protested, and will, of course, continue to protest against confining the political struggle to conspiracy. But this does not, of course, mean that we deny the need for a strong revolutionary organization. 5. 475. Only a centralized, militant organization that consistently carries out a social democratic policy that satisfies, so to speak, all revolutionary instincts and strivings, can safeguard the movement against making thoughtless attacks and prepare attacks that hold out the promise of success. 5. 477. 32. The organic selection of leaders. To the accusations of lack of internal democracy, the reply is simple. You ask for a large democracy in a situation of clandestine activity, instead of a strict, secret, and rigorous selection. However, it is also clear that Lenin does not refer to an absolute democratic principle, but to the banal mechanism by which comrades in the party are elected to the various functions. Electing does not only mean voting, but choosing, selecting. And Lenin's words, properly understood, refer not to the defense of the mechanism, but of the substance of the party's organic functioning. Lenin here addresses the Russians, for whom the European parties must also be an example of organization. He tells them that in a country that is not feudal, but bourgeois and democratic, where freedom of speech exists, the party can function according to its own forms, where those who run for office are known to all. We would like to underline here. Consequently, all party members, knowing all the facts, can elect or refuse to elect this person to a particular party office. The general control, in the literal sense of the term, exercised over every act of a party man in the political field brings into existence an automatically operating mechanism which produces what in biology is called the survival of the fittest. Natural selection by full publicity, election, and general control provides the assurance that, in the last analysis, every political figure will be in his proper place, do the work for which he is best fitted by his powers and abilities, feel the effects of his mistakes on himself, and prove before all the world his ability to recognize mistakes and to avoid them. Lenin goes on to refer to a non-democratic regime, such as the Russian one at the time, but history would soon confirm that very little democracy will be enjoyed by revolutionary communists in Germany, in Italy. His words, correctly understood, surpass and deny even the adoption of the democratic mechanism within the party. But in a regime such as the Russian, a broad democracy is nothing more than a useless and harmful toy. It is a useless toy because, in point of fact, no revolutionary organization has ever practiced, or could practice, broad democracy, however much it may have desired to do so. It is a harmful toy because any attempt to practice the broad democratic principle will simply facilitate the work of the police in carrying out large-scale raids, will perpetuate the prevailing primitiveness, and will divert the thoughts of the practical workers from the serious and pressing task of training themselves to become professional revolutionaries to that of drawing up detailed paper rules for election systems. Only abroad, where very often people with no opportunity for conducting really active work gather, could this playing at democracy develop here and there, especially in small groups. 33. Complete and fraternal confidence among revolutionaries. The only serious organizational principle for the active workers of our movement should be the strictest secrecy, the strictest selection of members, and the training of professional revolutionaries. Given these qualities, something even more than democratism would be guaranteed to us, namely, complete, comradely, mutual confidence among revolutionaries. This is absolutely essential for us, because there can be no question of replacing it by general democratic control in Russia. It would be a great mistake to believe that the impossibility of establishing real, democratic, inverted commas are Lenin's, control renders the members of the revolutionary organization beyond control altogether. They have not the time to think about toy forms of democratism with a close and compact body of comrades in which complete mutual confidence prevails, but they have a lively sense of their responsibility, knowing as they do from experience that an organization of real revolutionaries will stop at nothing to rid itself of an unworthy member. Moreover, there is a fairly well-developed public opinion in Russian and international revolutionary circles, which has a long history behind it, and which sternly and ruthlessly punishes every departure from the duties of comradeship, and democratism, real and not toy democratism, certainly forms a component part of the conception of comradeship. Take all this into consideration, and you will realize that this talk and these resolutions about anti-democratic tendencies have the musty odor of the playing at generals which is indulged in abroad. 5, 479-481. It is evident here that with real democratism, Lenin means nothing but the organic unity of the party. Not very different is what the party writes in 1922 in the Rome Theses 1:4. The announcement of these programmatic declarations, and the appointment of the men to whom are entrusted the various positions in the party organization, is formally carried out by a means of a consultation, democratic in form, of the party's representative assemblies, but in reality they must be understood as a product of the real process which accumulates elements of experience and realizes the preparation and selection of leaders, thus shaping both the programmatic content and the hierarchical constitution of the party. The organicity that must orient the party when it comes to choose the comrades to whom to entrust party responsibilities is also visible in the comment Lenin makes about the choice of the components of the Iskra editorial board, i.e. of the comrades who were to constitute the party's center. The old board of 6 was so ineffectual that never once in all its 3 years did it meet in full force. That may seem incredible, but it is a fact. Not one of the 45 issues of Iskra was made up, in the editorial and technical sense, by anyone but Martov or Lenin, and never once was any major theoretical issue raised by anyone but Plekhanov. Axelrod did no work at all. He contributed literally nothing to Zarya, and only 3 or 4 articles to all the 45 issues of Iskra. Zasulich and Starovir only contributed and advised. They never did any actual editorial work. Who ought to be elected to the political leadership, to the center, was as clear as daylight to every delegate at the Congress after the month it had been in session. 7:31. These quotations clarify Lenin's thought, which is entirely in common with the way of existing of the current party. First of all, the contempt for democracy, a toy of general burlesque. Secondly, the functioning of the party is presented as that of a team in which the comrade finds himself in the function that is organically most suited to him, what the left called organic centralism from its inception and which our party still practices. The comrades have their organic place in the party, fraternal consideration, and trust between comrades, equally organic processes for identifying shortcomings or real betrayals. It is the problem of guarantees, which we have faced many times in our texts. Democratism invoked as a cure-all is a form of primitivism, and therefore by now, already in 1902, of opportunism. Also in his letter to a comrade on our organizational tasks of 1902, Lenin did not invoke statutes or organizational norms of a democratic type, but identified the solution to problems of efficiency and operational capacity and fraternal relations between comrades, and as a last resort in the appeal to the central organ, which for him obviously represented the doctrine of the party, the corpus of the theory of revolution, the only decisive instrument for settling all questions that may arise. 34. Do not love anyone, love everyone. Immediately after the Second Congress, instead of railing against Martov for leaving the editorial office and prefiguring a split, which there would be, Lenin concluded his account of the Second Congress of the RSDLP with a reminder to all comrades of the true values of party work, far more than bureaucratic and democratic formalisms. The Russian social democratic movement is in the throes of the last difficult transition from the circles to a party, from Philistinism to a realization of revolutionary duty, from acting by means of scandal-mongering and circle pressure to discipline. Anyone who values party work and action in the interests of the social democratic labor movement will refuse to tolerate such wretched sophistries as a legitimate and loyal boycott of the central bodies. He will not allow the cause to suffer and the work to be brought to a standstill because a dozen or so individuals are displeased that they and their friends were not elected to the central bodies. He will not allow party officials to be subjected to private and secret pressure through threats of non-collaboration, through boycotts, through cutting off of funds, through scandal-mongering and lying tales. 7:34. This does not mean, however, that relations between comrades should be guided by sentimentalism, an aspect on which he dwells in recounting the experience of his first encounter with Plekhanov, 4:342, from which he emerged disappointed by the person, but strengthened in his determination to go ahead anyway. In Politique de Bord of 1952, the party drew the same conclusions. A long and tragic experience should therefore have taught that in party activity we must utilize each militant according to his particular attitudes and possibilities, but that we must not love anyone and be ready to throw away anyone, even if he had done 11 months in prison each year of his life. We must be able to take the decision on the options for action in front of momentous events outside the personal authority of masters, leaders, and executives, and based on the pre-established norms of principle and action of our movement, an extremely difficult endeavor, as we all know, but without which one cannot see how a powerful movement may reappear. 35. Internal hierarchy in decision-making. Proof of Lenin's consideration for internal democracy can be found in what Trotsky reports in My Life. It was at the onset of the Second Congress. One of the important points in the scheme of organization was the relationship to be established between the central organ, the Iskra, and the Central Committee which was to function in Russia. I arrived abroad with the belief that the editorial board should be made subordinate to the Central Committee. This was the prevailing attitude of the majority of the Iskra followers. "It can't be done," objected Lenin. "The correlation of forces is different. How can they guide us from Russia?" "No, it can't be done. We are the stable center, we are stronger in ideas, and we must exercise the guidance from here." "Then this will mean a complete dictatorship of the editorial board?" I asked. "Well, what's wrong with that?" retorted Lenin. "In the present situation, it must be so." It is not respect for democratic rules that keeps the party on the right track, but complete and stubborn adherence to Marxist doctrine. And Lenin alone personified this at that time. The doctrine was in the central organ, that is, in the historic party. How can the best revolutionary work result from a democratic consultation, or worse, from a mediation between different currents, which unfortunately existed in Lenin's party? Lenin is very clear on this again in 1920, when the workers' opposition demanded that decisions be taken on the basis of proportional representation in the Central Committee and in the various city committees, and that democracy should be utilized to solve operational problems. Proportional representation is essential in calling a party conference as a directing body, or a party congress. When, however, it is a question of setting up an executive body charged with the conduct of practical work, proportional representation has never been applied, and can hardly be considered justified. The decisive consideration must be that you, members of this conference, should have a personal knowledge of each candidate and give preference to that group which may be expected to work harmoniously, and not the principle of proportionality in the election of an executive body, a principle that has never been applied, and to apply which would hardly be right at present. 31:428. We have already seen that for Lenin, internal democracy was inevitable, but also that when it comes to operational decisions, and even when it comes to stating the founding positions of the party, democracy is a useless and even harmful piece of tinsel, which the great Vladimir was willing to do without. We, thanks to the experience of further decades of counter-revolution and betrayal by so-called Leninists, got rid of democracy completely, in all its forms. In the party it is customary to state the paradox that democracy could have meaning if at the same time the living, the dead, and the children of future generations could vote. 36. The guarantees. Since the party body is formed on the basis of voluntary adhesion, The guarantee that the strictest discipline is obtained must therefore be sought in the clear definition of the unique, and binding for all, tactical rules, in the continuity of the methods of struggle and in the clarity of the organizational rules. In Marxism and Authority, 1956, we wrote, "We will just remind the guarantees that we have so often proposed and illustrated, also in the Dialogue with the Dead. Doctrine. The center has no faculty to change it from that established, from the beginning, in the classic texts of the movement. Organization. Unique internationally, it does not vary for aggregations or mergers, but only for individual admissions. The organized members cannot join other movements. Tactics. The possibilities of maneuver and action must be foreseen by decisions of international congresses with a closed system. At the base you cannot start actions not arranged by the center. The center cannot invent new tactics and moves under the pretext of new facts. The link between the party base and the center becomes a dialectical form. If the party exercises the dictatorship of the class in the state, and against the classes against which the state acts, there is no dictatorship of the center of the party on the base. The dictatorship is not denied with a formal internal mechanical democracy, but with respect for those dialectical ties." 37. An all-Russia political newspaper. Also counterposing local work with national work indicates, in those who defend the former, a form of primitivism. Local work also languishes because there is no national activity plan, an aspect that Lenin would clarify better in the fifth and last chapter, although in reality he spends many pages demonstrating with historical data what he argues. Rather than supporting the local press, there is a need for a nationwide organ, specialized on union work and agitation. Proposing a plan for a political newspaper for all of Russia was a response to the criticism of the primitivists. It was an organ that would collect point by point the contributions of all committees and circles. They were not yet sections of a single party. For Lenin, a newspaper for the whole of Russia comes very close to his idea of the party center. In the structure of the press organ, including its distribution, its reading by comrades, its propaganda, Lenin paints an embryo of the party, especially in the police regime of the time. The fundamental and urgent need is that of a Marxist and revolutionary party, with a solid theoretical basis, shared by the whole organization, through precisely an organ around which the work of all militants is coagulated and takes shape. So nothing to do with debates and parades of opinions, but a newspaper worthy of the Communist Party. After a reminder of the need to define oneself before joining, in Declaration of the Editorial Board of Iskra, Lenin clarifies without possibility of misunderstanding. "We do not intend to make our publication a mere storehouse of various views. On the contrary, we shall conduct it in the spirit of a strictly defined tendency. This tendency can be expressed by the word Marxism, and there is hardly need to add that we stand for the consistent development of the ideas of Marx and Engels, our sculpting, and emphatically reject the equivocating, vague, and opportunist corrections for which Edward Bernstein, Peter Struve, and many others have set the fashion." 4. 354 to 355. Once this was made clear, what should the newspaper be for? We should not only be clear on the nature of the organization that is needed and its precise purpose, but we must elaborate a definite plan for an organization, so that its formation may be undertaken from all aspects. A newspaper is what we most of all need. Without it we cannot conduct that systematic, all-round propaganda and agitation, consistent in principle, which is the chief and permanent task of social democracy in general, and, in particular, the pressing task of the moment, when interest in politics and in questions of socialism has been aroused among the broadest strata of the population. It may be said without exaggeration that the frequency and regularity with which a newspaper is printed and distributed can serve as a precise criterion of how well this cardinal and most essential sector of our militant activities is built up. The role of a newspaper, however, is not limited solely to the dissemination of ideas, to political education, and to the enlistment of political allies. A newspaper is not only a collective propagandist and a collective agitator, it is also a collective organizer. With the aid of the newspaper, and through it, a permanent organization will naturally take shape that will engage, not only in local activities, but in regular general work, and will train its members to follow political events carefully, appraise their significance and their effect on the various strata of the population, and develop effective means for the Revolutionary Party to influence these events. The mere technical task of regularly supplying the newspaper with copy and of promoting regular distribution will necessitate a network of local agents of the United Party, who will maintain constant contact with one another, know the general state of affairs, get accustomed to performing regularly their detailed functions in the all-Russian work, and test their strength in the organization of various revolutionary actions. This network of agents will form the skeleton of precisely the kind of organization we need. 5. 20-23. The whole point is that there is no other way of training strong political organizations except through the medium of an all-Russian newspaper. All without exception now talk of the importance of unity, of the necessity for gathering and organizing, but in the majority of cases what is lacking is a definite idea of where to begin and how to bring about this unity. I continue to insist that we can start establishing real contacts only with the aid of a common newspaper, as the only regular, all-Russia enterprise, one which will summarize the results of the most diverse forms of activity, and thereby stimulate people to march forward untiringly along all the innumerable paths leading to revolution, in the same way as all roads lead to Rome. If we do not want unity in name only, we must arrange for all local study circles immediately to assign, say, a fourth of their forces to active work for the common cause. In a great many cases, these forces are now being bled white on restricted local work, but under the circumstances we are discussing, it would be possible to transfer a capable agitator or organizer from one end of the country to the other, and the occasion for doing this would constantly arise. Beginning with short journeys on party business at the party's expense, the comrades would become accustomed to being maintained by the party, to becoming professional revolutionaries, and to training themselves as real political leaders, around what is in itself still a very innocuous and very small, but regular and common effort. In the full sense of the word, a regular army of tried fighters would systematically gather and receive their training to rouse the whole people. That is what we should dream of. 5. 499-509. 38. The good tactic and the good party. Which are the characteristic features of this organization? The ability to foretell in its main lines the course of events. Those who make nationwide political agitation the cornerstone of their program, their tactics, and their organizational work, as Iskra does, stand the least risk of missing the revolution. The people who are now engaged throughout Russia in weaving the network of connections that spread from the all-Russian newspaper not only did not miss the spring events, but, on the contrary, gave us an opportunity to foretell them, and if they live they will not miss the revolution, which, first and foremost, will demand of us experience in agitation, ability to support, in a social democratic manner, every protest, as well as direct the spontaneous movement, while safeguarding it from the mistakes of friends and the traps of enemies. Flexibility. Only such organization will ensure the flexibility required of a militant social democratic organization, viz. The ability to adapt itself immediately to the most diverse and rapidly changing conditions of struggle. Contempt for haste, impatience, typical of the bourgeois society. See also above. Unless we are able to devise political tactics and an organizational plan for work over a very long period, while ensuring, in the very process of this work, our party's readiness to be at its post and fulfill its duty in every contingency, whenever the march of events is accelerated. Unless we succeed in doing this, we shall prove to be but miserable political adventurers. Only Nadezhdin, who began but yesterday to describe himself as a social democrat, can forget that the aim of social democracy is to transform radically the conditions of life of the whole of mankind, and that for this reason it is not permissible for a social democrat to be perturbed by the question of the duration of the work. Carrying out all party duties. The revolution must be regarded as a series of more or less powerful outbreaks rapidly alternating with periods of more or less complete calm. For that reason, the principal content of the activity of our party organization, the focus of this activity, should be work that is both possible and essential in the period of a most powerful outbreak, as well as in the period of complete calm. Our wiseacre fails to see that it is precisely during the revolution that we shall stand in need of the results of our theoretical battles with the critics, in order to be able resolutely to combat their practical positions. Organic structuring of work. But a network of agents that would form in the course of establishing and distributing the common newspaper would not have to sit about and wait for the call of an uprising, but could carry on the regular activity that would guarantee the highest probability of success in the event of an uprising. Such activity would strengthen our contacts with the broadest strata of the working masses, and with all social strata that are discontented with the autocracy. Therefore, in a word, the plan for an all-Russia political newspaper, far from representing the fruits of the labor of armchair workers, infected with dogmatism and bookishness, is the most practical plan for immediate and all-round preparation of the uprising, with, at the same time, no loss of sight for a moment of the pressing day-to-day work. 513 to 516. The mere technical task of guarding, disseminating, and delivering, etc., the newspaper needs frameworks at central level that guarantee the correct organization of this body and trustees in local groups. 39. Communist centralism versus class dispersion within bourgeois society. Ultimately, it is a question of crafting an organization as a premise and not as a result of the revolutionary process, or, if you will, as a result of an already advanced revolutionary process that began with the birth and opposition of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat many centuries ago. The Mensheviks did not understand this in 1903, when they separated from the majority group that referred to Lenin. A letter from Axelrod to Kautsky of June 6, 1904, is quite explicit on the matter. In short, Axelrod believed that the situation in Russia was not mature for the birth of an organized party, structured with a view to seizing power. He ridiculed Lenin's organizational perspective as trivial and pitiable caricature of the autocratic bureaucratic system of our Ministry of the Interiors, organizational fetishism, which would cause the misunderstanding that led to the split. But on one point he saw clearly, although interpreting wrongly. The divergences among us on organizational problems arose for the first time in a clear and concrete way only with reference to the methods and procedures utilized by Lenin and his supporters to practically enforce centralism, which we all admit. Those very methods and procedures are the only real guarantee of both the party's correct functioning and of the maintenance of its orthodoxy. The pamphlet ends with a brief summary of the 3 stages of social democracy in Russia, and with the hope that there will be a 4th, with the exit from the crisis and with the strengthening of militant Marxism. Lenin hoped so, and we know that this would be the case, thanks above all to his powerful and tireless work, which is mainly aimed at creating the organization worthy of the name. Thus he concludes, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. In its struggle for power, the proletariat has no other weapon but organization. Disunited by the rule of anarchic competition in the bourgeois world, ground down by forced labor for capital, constantly thrust back to the lower depths of utter destitution, savagery, and degeneration, the proletariat can, and inevitably will, become an invincible force only through its ideological unification on the principles of Marxism being reinforced by the material unity of organization, which welds millions of toilers into an army of the working class. Neither the senile rule of the Russian autocracy, nor the senescent rule of international capital will be able to withstand this army. It will more and more firmly close its ranks, in spite of all zigzags and backward steps, in spite of the opportunist phrasemongering of the Girondists of present-day social democracy, in spite of the self-satisfied exaltation of the retrograde circle spirit, and in spite of the tinsel and fuss of intellectualist anarchism. 7. 412 to 413. 40. Organic centralism. Although he operated in an age and in an environment in which the democratic method had not yet clearly demonstrated to the party how unsuitable it was for its functioning, what we have seen so far demonstrates, to those who want to understand, that Lenin, based on his critical observation of the working mechanisms of the socialist parties, took sides with a way of being of the party that we can now define as organic and centralistic. If centralism and organizational discipline are the conditions for the existence of the Communist Party as such a condition cannot be obtained with the same mechanisms of the bourgeois parties. Even in its functioning, the working-class party is forced to be revolutionary. The way of being of the party will be formulated by the comrades of the left since the birth of the Communist Party of Italy, section of the Third International. In the years that followed, the experience of the Stalinist counter-revolution was the clear proof that organic centralism was the only method to give the party a chance to survive, even organizationally, in periods of revolutionary reflux. enunciated again in 1926 at the Third Congress of the PCI, Lyon, organic centralism was reaffirmed at all the party's turning points, in the post-war period, in 1952, in 1965, in 1973. It is only thanks to a close, almost fanatical adherence to our way of working that the party is still active and in good health 68 years after its reconstitution in 1952, where in good health means being secured on the doctrinal cornerstones of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and the left. What, then, is organic centralism? We will certainly not deny ourselves here by giving a series of rules, a code, a regulation, or, worse, a statute. Rather, we will recall some of the cornerstones of our way of working, already partly outlined in the preceding text, citing the party at various times of its existence. Without forgetting that our history teaches us the acquisition of our method cannot derive from bookish descriptions, however detailed they may be. The comrade masters the working method of the party by working inside it, in its ferociously anti-bourgeois setting, which puts together all types of comrades and of generations, with the additional difficulty that in our case, he must get rid of a mass of cultural ideological dead weight, soaked with the myth of the individual, of the fatherland, and of divinity, with which the boundless means of bourgeois society have poisoned the depth of his soul. However, it must first be clarified that the internal forms of behavior of the Communist Party do not respond to commandments, aesthetic canons, or abstract moral norms, but are the teachings of a painful past that has seen in their denial the poison administered to the party to accompany its degeneration to the point of its passage to the enemy. Moreover, a coherent internal organic life among comrades who hold hands closely is a coefficient of strength, of material fact, that comes before conscience and affection, a discipline that in social warfare gives the party that effective unity of intent and movement that is denied to every bourgeois organism and institution. 41. Democratic centralism. What would be the formal sacred rules, which for Lenin were not as such, that would guarantee the functioning of democratic centralism, which all leftists oppose to organic centralism? The differences present within the party can only be resolved in a relationship of forces, with the consequence of political struggle, the proclaimed right to organize into trends and fractions, formation of pressure groups in view of the elections of managers and congresses, regularly convened, election of governing bodies with the counting of votes, periodic verification of the political line of the party through the possibility granted to minorities to become a majority. Democratic centralism, raised as a principle against Lenin, sanctions the non-Marxist principle of the continuous reconstruction of theory and tactics in periodic congresses on the basis of purported changes in the social, economic, and political conditions of society, conditions that would of course vary from country to country, if not actually modulated for particular areas within individual countries. The choices are not determined on the basis of an invariant program, nor on the basis of historical and scientific evidence, but on the basis of the majority gathered around a given solution. Lenin, while he could not avoid some of these rules, and even put them forward as a first instrument against the dispersion and indiscipline of circles, was continually accused of hindering, with his excessive centralism, the development of internal party democracy. In 1972, we compared the two centralisms in this way: Introduction to the Theses after 1945, from In Defense of the Continuity of the Communist Program, page 130. In truth, the question of organic centralism as opposed to democratic centralism is far from being terminological. In its contradictory nature, the second formula reflects, in the noun, the aspiration to the single world party as we have always hoped for, but reflects in the adjective the reality of parties still heterogeneous in historical formation and doctrinal basis. In our view, on the other hand, the party presents itself with characters of organic centrality because it is not a part, albeit the most advanced, of the proletarian class, but its organ, synthesizer of all its elementary thrusts as of all its militants, whichever direction they come from, and this is due to the possession of a theory, a set of principles, a program, which bypass the time limits of today to express the historical trend, the final goal and the way of working of the proletarian and communist generations of the past, present, and future, and who go beyond the boundaries of nationality and state to embody the interests of revolutionary workers of the whole world. Such is, we add, also by virtue of a forecast, at least in broad terms, of the unfolding of historical situations, and therefore of the ability to establish a body of directives and tactical rules that are mandatory for everyone, obviously not without considering the times and areas of double revolution, or, instead, of pure proletarian revolution, also foreseen and implying a very precise, even if different, tactical behavior. If the party is in possession of such theoretical and practical homogeneity, possession that is not guaranteed forever, but a reality to be defended tooth and nail, and, if necessary, to reconquer every time, its organization, which is at the same time its discipline, is born and develops organically on the unitary line of the program and of practical action, and expresses in its different forms of realization, in the hierarchy of its organs, the perfect adherence of the party to the complex of its functions, none excluded. 42. The left's centralism. We have a first enunciation in 1922, the democratic principle. Democracy cannot be a principle for us. Centralism indisputably is, since the essential characteristics of party organization must be unity of structure and action. In order to express the continuity of party structure in space, the term centralism is sufficient, but in order to introduce the essential idea of continuity in time, the historical continuity of the struggle which, surmounting successive obstacles, always advances towards the same goal, we will propose saying, linking these two essential ideas of unity together, that the Communist Party bases its organization on organic centralism. In 1926, in a situation of retreat and loss of the revolutionary compass by the International Party, of which we were perfectly aware, the left reiterated the importance of the correct management of the party. 2. 5. The Communist parties must achieve an organic centralism, which, whilst including as much consultation with the base as possible, ensures the spontaneous elimination of any grouping which starts to differentiate itself. This cannot be achieved by means of the formal and mechanical prescriptions of a hierarchy, but, as Lenin says in Left-Wing Communism, edition, by means of correct revolutionary politics. Draft theses presented by the left at the Third Congress of PCI, Lyon, 1926. In short, the party must be a centralized structure, with the existence of different organs and of a central body capable of coordinating, directing, and ordering the whole network. Absolute discipline of all members of the organization in executing orders placed by the center. No autonomy for local sections or groups. No communication network diverging from the unitary one that connects the center to the periphery and the periphery to the center, and the never-ending activity of study, of sculpting of the doctrine, which is peculiar to the party, does not only have a theoretical value, it is also, and above all, an organizational necessity, in order to be at any time able to express the correct revolutionary politics. 43. How the party is structured according to Lenin. Not very different is what Lenin advocates in Letter to a Comrade on Our Organizational Tasks, 6, 234, 249 to 250. The newspaper can and should be the ideological leader of the party, evolving theoretical truths, tactical principles, general organizational ideas, and the general tasks of the whole party at any given moment. And it is not merely because revolutionary work does not always lend itself to definite organizational form that rules are useless. No, definite organizational form is necessary, and we must endeavor to give such form to all our work as far as possible. That is permissible to a much greater extent than is generally thought, and achievable not through rules, but solely and exclusively, we must keep on reiterating this, through transmitting exact information to the party center. It is only then that we shall have real organizational form, connected with real responsibility and inter-party publicity. As we saw in What is to be Done, we recall that, when Lenin says newspaper, magazine, Iskra, when he is in it, he means the center of the party, which in 1902 was above all the ideological doctrinal center of the party. Every reference to the central organ means a reference to orthodox Marxism, as presented to the various circles by the theoretical work of Lenin himself and of the other members of Iskra. So he was already speaking of the dictatorship of the program, and not of men, even though we know at that moment the true revolutionary doctrine resided in the work of an individual, incidentally a negative aspect, as an index of parties' vulnerability, and it would be manifest after the premature death of the great Vladimir, when a clear military defeat would have been historically more desirable, rather than a triumph of the counter-revolution that came about through a degeneration of the Russian party, of the International, and of all the national sections. 44. Joint and unanimous work to avoid splits. We gather another testimony of Lenin, which as we will see coincides with the left's way of working. To the question, what should not be done? What should not be done in general, and what, in particular, should not be done so as to avoid a split? My reply is, first of all, do not conceal from the party the appearance and growth of potential causes of a split. Do not conceal any of the circumstances and events that constitute such causes, and, what is more, do not conceal them not only from the party, but, as far as possible, from the outside public either. Broad publicity, that is the surest, the only reliable means of avoiding such splits as can be avoided, and of reducing, to a minimum, the harm of splits that are no longer avoidable. Letter to Iskra, 7, 115-116. Again, in 1920, at a party conference, while still fighting against the armies of whites, faced with the difficulties posed by the workers' opposition, Lenin, while conceding that those comrades made some good points, insisted above all that the whole party be involved in solving the problem. But at the same time he recalled that there is a program, which must be respected at all costs if we don't want to succumb to the enemy. The opposition no doubt contains a sound element, but when it turns into an opposition for the sake of opposition, we should certainly put an end to it. We have wasted a great deal of time in altercations, quarrels, and recrimination, and we must put an end to all that, and try to come to some agreement to work more effectively. We must make certain concessions, but we must succeed in making our work harmonious, for otherwise we cannot exist when we are surrounded by enemies at home and abroad. 31, 424. Therefore, strict adherence to the programmatic cornerstones, with well-known criteria, always repeated to all, not only in section meetings, but also in the press, to solve problems collectively, after which total executive discipline, without complaints about lack of democracy. It is around this inseparable and very hard core, doctrine, program, tactic, a collective and impersonal heritage of the movement, that our organization is crystallized, and what holds it together is not the knout of the organizing center, but the unique and uniform thread linking leaders and base, center and periphery, committing them to the observance and defense of a system of ends and means, none of which is separable from the other. In this real life of the Communist Party, not of any party, but only of it as it is communist in deeds and not in name, the puzzle that haunts the bourgeois democrat. Who decides the top or the bottom, the most or the few? Who commands and who obeys? The generous concern of the comrades that the party should operate in an organizational, safe, linear, and homogeneous manner should therefore address, as Lenin himself admonished in the letter to a comrade on our organizational tasks, not a search for statutes, codes, and constitutions, or worse, for personalities of special temperament, but rather the best way to contribute, each and every one, to the harmonious performance of the functions without which the party would cease to exist as a unifying force, and as guide and representation of the class, which is the only way to help it solve, day by day, by itself, as in What is to be Done, where the newspaper is referred to as a collective organizer, its problems of life and action. Here is the key to organic centralism. Here is the sure weapon in the historic battle of the classes, not in the empty abstraction of the alleged norms of the functioning of the most perfect mechanisms, or, worse, in the squalor of trials of men who by organic selection found themselves handling them. The continuity of party action on the thread of the left's tradition, Il Programma Comunista, No. 3-5, 1967. 45. How to guarantee discipline. The party functions thanks to the work of men. What are the guarantees that these men will not betray or make mistakes? The objection of the petty bourgeois is evident. Who will prevent individuals from doing whatever they like, from disobeying? Because in every individual, even militant in the party, there is the germ of individualism, self-exaltation, anarchism, etc. Who will prevent individuals from raising problems just for the sake of doing it, or from making criticisms? The left has already answered more than 50 years ago to objections of this kind, and the answer sounds like this. In an organism, like the party, which is formed on the basis of voluntary participation in combat and sacrifice, together in a common trench, these individual manifestations must remain rare exceptions and can be easily resolved. Different is the case of dissensions and episodes of indiscipline that arise, multiply, and grow instead of shrinking and tending to disappear, if only for the fact that instead of attracting healthy individuals who are willing to get rid of their individualistic itches, it begins to attract loudmouths and fools. And this too is resolved not only in chasing out the chatterboxes, but in looking for the reasons the organic party attracts them, and the remedy lies in making the party's appearance so sharp and clear in all its theoretical and practical manifestations as to discourage any adhesion other than those who are willing to become a true militant of the revolution. The solution never lies, neither for Lenin nor for the left, in intensifying bureaucratic networks and organizational repressions, which we have always declared that we can very well do without, in the same way that we do without the count of individual heads. The art of predicting how the party will react to orders, and which orders will obtain a good response, is the art of revolutionary tactics. This can only be entrusted to the collective use of the experience gained from past action, summarized in clear rules of action. Given that the party is perfectible and not perfect, we do not hesitate to say that much has to be sacrificed to the clarity and to the power of persuasion of the tactical guidelines, even if this involves a certain schematization. It is not just the good party that makes good tactics, but good tactics that make the good party. And good tactics can only be those understood and chosen by everyone in their fundamentals. Draft theses presented by the left at the Third Congress of the PCI, Lyon, 1926. The guarantee of obedience to central orders by the base is no longer given by the observance of the articles of a statute or a code, but because they are those expected, since they belong to the common heritage of the party. The party hierarchy no longer needs to be elected by the base, nor to be nominated from above, because the only selection criterion remains that of being able to carry out the various functions of the party organ. That at the center there is a certain comrade, rather than another, cannot change anything in the political direction of the party, nor in its tactics. It can influence the greater or lesser central efficiency, but the designation of the most suitable militants in the various functions becomes a natural and spontaneous fact that does not need any particular sanction. The party is a voluntary organization, not in the sense that it is adhered to by free rational choice, which we deny, but in the sense that every militant is materially free to leave us when he wants, and that not even after the revolution do we conceive forced access in our ranks. When you are in the organization, you are required to observe the strictest discipline in the execution of central orders, but the transgression of this rule cannot be eliminated by the center except through the expulsion of the offenders. The center does not have available, in order to be obeyed, any other material sanctions. What can keep the militant on the front line and make him loyal and obedient to the orders he receives? Certainly not the articles of a penal code, but the acknowledgement that those orders belong to a common ground, are consistent with the principles, aims, program, and action plan to which he adhered. Inasmuch as the party organ knows how to move on this historical basis, how to acquire it, how to permeate all of its organization and its activity with it, that the real conditions for the most absolute discipline can be set. To the extent that this occurs in cases of indiscipline, the cases of indiscipline, not attributable to individual issues, become less frequent, and the party acquires a univocal behavior in action. The work to create a truly centralized organization, capable of responding at all times to unitary provisions, therefore consists essentially in the continuous clarification and sculpting of the cornerstones of theory, program, tactics, and in the continuous conforming to them of the party's action, of its methods of struggle. We must have an absolutely homogeneous Communist Party, without differences of opinion and different groupings within it. But this statement is not a dogma, it isn't an a priori principle, it is an end for which we can and must fight, in the course of development, which will lead to the formation of the true Communist Party, on condition, that is, that all ideological, tactical, and organizational questions have been correctly posed and resolved. Discipline, then, is a point of arrival, not a point of departure, not a platform that is somehow indestructible. Moreover, this corresponds to the voluntary nature of entry into our organization. So, the remedy for the frequent cases of lack of discipline cannot be sought in some kind of party penal code. Report of the Left at the 5th section of the 6th Enlarged Executive of the Communist International, February 23, 1926. Nor do measures of ideological and organizational terror, which recall the dismal practices of party-destroying Stalinism, make sense. Our supplementary theses on the historical task, action, and structure of the World Communist Party affirm, in Il Programma Comunista, another lesson we can draw from events in the life of the Third International is that of the vanity of ideological terror, a horrible method in which it was attempted to substitute the natural process of diffusing our doctrines via contact with harsh reality in a social setting, with forced indoctrination of recalcitrant and confused elements, either for reasons more powerful than party and men, or due to a faulty evolution of the party itself, by humiliating them and mortifying them in public congresses open even to the enemy, even if they had been leaders and exponents of party action during important political and historical episodes. Within the Revolutionary Party, as it moves inexorably towards victory, obeying orders is spontaneous and complete, but not blind or compulsory. In fact, centralized discipline, as illustrated in our theses and associated supporting documentation, is equivalent to a perfect harmony of the duties and actions of the rank and file with those of the center, and the bureaucratic practices of an anti-Marxist voluntarism are no substitute for this. Supplementary theses on the historical task, the action, and the structure of the World Communist Party, 1966. The party that we are sure to see resurrected in a bright future will be constituted by a vigorous minority of anonymous proletarians and revolutionaries, who may have different functions, such as the organs of the same living being, but all will be linked, at the center and at the base, to the norm that is above all members, inflexible, of respect of theory, of continuity and rigor in organization, of a precise method of strategic action whose range of allowed eventualities is drawn, in its inviolable vetoes, from the terrible historical lesson of the ravages of opportunism. In such a party, at last impersonal, no one will be able to abuse power, precisely because of its inimitable characteristic, which distinguishes it in the uninterrupted thread that originated in 1848. The theory of the primary function of the political party, only safekeeping and salvation of the historical energy of the proletariat. Il Programma Comunista, number 21-22, 1958. 46. How to share duties. Already in 1924, in Lenin on the Path of Revolution, at a conference held to commemorate his death, we had pinpointed the role of the individual in the party. The organization in the party, which allows the class to be truly such and live as such, presents itself as a unitary mechanism in which the various brains, certainly not only the brains, but also other individual organs, perform different tasks according to their attitudes and potential, all at the service of a purpose and an interest that progressively unites itself more and more intimately in time and space. This convenient expression has an empirical and not transcendent meaning. Not all individuals, therefore, have the same place and the same weight in the organization, as this division of tasks is implemented according to a more rational plan, and what is the case today for the party class will be the case tomorrow for society, which rules out that those who find themselves higher up are considered privileged over others. Our revolutionary evolution does not go towards disintegration, but towards the increasingly scientific connection of individuals to each other. It is anti-individualist, since it is materialist. It does not believe in the soul or in metaphysical and transcendent content of the individual, but includes the functions of the individual in a collective framework, creating a hierarchy that develops in the sense of increasingly eliminating coercion and replacing it with technical rationality. The party is already an example of a collective body without coercion. These general elements of the question show that no one better than us is beyond the banal meaning of egalitarianism and numerical democracy. In conclusion, if man, the exceptional instrument, exists, the movement uses him, but the movement still lives anyway when such an eminent personality is not found. Assuming that doctrine is not to be discussed, that the program is not discussed, that there is no discussion on the fundamental aspects of the tactical plan, internal relations take the form of jointly responsible work, in common, by all members of the party, aimed at finding, on the basis of a heritage common to all, the most appropriate solutions to the various problems. From all this ensues the importance of common work. All comrades must work. This is obvious. But as far as possible, comrades should work in all areas. There must be no specializations, separations between those who do a certain job and those who do another, even if it is obvious that we are not identical, as we will not be even in full communism. The whole art of running a secret organization should consist in making use of everything possible, in giving everyone something to do, at the same time retaining leadership of the whole movement, not by virtue of having the power, of course, but by virtue of authority, energy, greater experience, greater versatility, and greater talent. 6. 240. 47. Impersonality and anonymity. Joint work is the fulcrum of the organic nature of work in the party. Comrades approach their work free of any personalism or careerism. In Lenin's time it was not possible, but since 1952 we have never published the names of the comrades who write reports, articles, theses. This is not a moral or aesthetic choice. It corresponds to the undeniable fact that our work is no longer individual, if only because any study cannot ignore what was in our doctrine, what was previously written by other comrades, nor their past activity, whether these are the great Marx and Lenin, or obscure comrades who have contributed for a day, a year, or an entire lifetime, even comrades who eventually abandoned the party and Marxism, to whom some of the quotations we have listed belong. The revolution, we wrote, will rise again, but anonymously. On the fact that our mission is above any individual, Lenin allows Comrade Rousseff to speak. "We are hearing strange speeches from the lips of revolutionaries," Comrade Rousseff justly remarked, "speeches that are in marked disharmony with the concepts party work, party ethics." The principal argument on which the opponents of electing trios take their stand amounts to a purely Philistine view of party affairs, my emphases throughout. If we adopt this standpoint, which is a Philistine and not a party standpoint, we shall at every election have to consider, will not Petrov be offended if Ivanov is elected, and not he? Will some member of the organizing committee be offended if another member, and not he, is elected to the Central Committee? Where is this going to land us, comrades? If we have gathered here for the purpose of creating a party, and not of indulging in mutual compliments and Philistine sentimentality, then we can never agree to such a view. We are about to elect officials, and there can be no talk of lack of confidence in any person not elected. Our only consideration should be the interests of the work and a person's suitability for the post to which he is being elected. 7. 312 through 313. Although, as mentioned above, it was not possible for Lenin to write anonymously at a time when he himself embodied Marxist doctrine, and his party was not entirely homogeneous in theory, he nevertheless shied away from any cult of his person, as can be seen from various testimonies, such as Andreev's Lenin comme il fut, 1958. Neither at meetings, nor at conferences, nor in the press, did Lenin tolerate any praise, no exaltation of his personal merits. He opposed the cult of personality, alien to Marxists, and was always sincerely indignant at its minimal manifestations. The party and the masses always placed themselves in the foreground when analyzing historical events or tasks to be performed. Lenin's extreme modesty manifested itself in everything and always. Here it is easy to draw the parallel with our greatest masters. The birth of fractions, which in the old socialist parties could be a necessary and often useful fact when generated by movements in defense of Marxism, and therefore progressive in the evolution of the historic party, is, when it occurs in today's party, a pathological phenomenon. This is especially the case when the fraction that moves away from just revolutionary politics is the one that belongs to the center, as happened in 1972 to 1973. Following that event, a group of comrades, who then continued on the same path as always, and who are now part of the International Communist Party, were expelled in 1973 from the then organization. But in fact it was the center fraction that left the party, the historical party, while the formal one was facing an inevitable degeneration. In 1972, the comrades of the Florence section wrote a letter to the center, relating to the expulsion of an entire foreign section, which we report because it provides further important clarifications on what organic centralism is. It doesn't matter which comrade or group of comrades is at a given time, or on a given problem, on this or that of the two sides. It's the two sides that must never exist within the party. It is the way of life of the party that is based precisely on the absolute denial that sides exist, and that one must fight against the other. If a single comrade or a group of comrades do not realize a situation, or a problem, or persist in an error, the whole party is committed to clarifying, sculpting, reiterating an impersonal line as the weakness of a party point is the weakness of the whole party, the lack of clarity of the whole organization. And we have always said that if a comrade does not have clear ideas, it means that the party has not worked hard enough to clarify them, that more work is needed by the whole party. This is the only way the party can live and function. This is the organic method that is ours and that we claim, because it is the only method that allows us to live as an organization where there are neither comrades who understand, nor others who do not understand, neither comrades who make mistakes, nor others who do not make mistakes, but there are only comrades who, for better or worse, bring their contribution to the common battle against the class enemy and give this battle all their strength. For this reason, we do not share the triumphalist tone and statements of the last circular, in which it is stated that the last general meeting ended the battle against the onset of anti-Marxist ideologies, etc. The anti-Marxist tendencies have been there, it is clear, but the emphasis should be placed not so much on the victory achieved when we managed to eliminate them from the party, but on the defeat we suffered when they managed to penetrate our interior, destroying precious energies and demolishing a part of our organization. We must certainly not congratulate ourselves on having expelled them. We should rather reflect on why they managed to penetrate our interior, and work to make the party stronger and more impervious to these destructive influences. We must judge that our defenses were too weak to prevent the enemy from dismantling them, and work to strengthen and enhance these defenses. This is the lesson we must learn from the crisis that the party has suffered. Yet the party's attitude towards the fractions was clear since 1926, and continually reaffirmed in the theses. To raise the problem of fractions as a moral problem, from the point of view of a penal code, is not the correct line of action. Is there any example in history of a comrade forming a fraction for his own amusement? Such a thing has never happened. Is there a historical example of opportunism insinuating itself into the party through a fraction, of the organization of fractions serving as the basis for a defeatist mobilization of the working class, and of the Revolutionary Party being saved thanks to the intervention of the fraction killers? No. Experience has shown that opportunism always infiltrates our ranks under the guise of unity. It is in its interests to influence the largest possible mass, and it is therefore behind the screen of unity that it puts forward its most deceitful proposals. Moreover, the history of fractions goes to show that if fractions do no honor to the parties in which they have been formed, they do honor to those who form them. The birth of a fraction shows that something has gone wrong in the party. To remedy the ill, it is necessary to seek out the historical causes which gave rise to it, that gave rise to the fraction, and that prompted it to take shape. The causes lie in the ideological and political errors of the party. The fractions are not the sickness, but merely the symptom, and if you want to treat a sick organism, you have to try to discover the cause of the sickness, not combat the symptoms. Report of the Left at the 5th section of the 6th Enlarged Executive of the Communist International, February 23, 1926. The lessons of defeats caused by the degeneration of the center are those that have strengthened us most in the application of organic centralism, and those are the most painful, most disastrous defeats for the party. From the defeat of the parties of the Second International to that of the Moscow Center, which would destroy the international revolutionary thrust in order to shackle the workers' movements to the interests of the Russian state. 49. Party and fractions. The left never hesitated to expound with the utmost frankness the objections that the behavior of the center caused. It was so in the Italian Socialist Party. It was so in the International, and even before Stalin himself. When the comrades of the left were forced in 1925 to dissolve the Intesa Committee, they obeyed, but declared, "In the face of a material imposition, we remember above all to stay at our post as soldiers of the Communist Party and of the International, which we will maintain with an iron will, without ever renouncing opposition, through tireless criticism, of those methods that we consider to be in conflict with the interest and the future of our cause." Un documento indegno di comunisti. L'Unità, July 18, 1925. In The Opportunist Danger in the International, Stato Operaio, July 1925, we wrote, without diplomacy, "We believe in the possibility that the International will fall into opportunism. The most glorious and brilliant historical precedents cannot guarantee a movement, even and above all a revolutionary vanguard movement, against the possibility of internal revisionism. The guarantees against opportunism cannot consist in the past, but must be present and timely at all times. We do not see serious inconveniences in an exaggerated concern for the opportunist danger. Of course, the criticism and alarmism made for fun are very regrettable, but it is certain that they will have no means to weaken the movement in any way and will be easily overcome. While the danger is very serious if, on the contrary, as unfortunately happened in so many precedents, the opportunist disease is growing before one has dared somewhere to vigorously give the alarm. Criticism without error does not cause even 1,000th of the harm caused by error without criticism. Comrade Girone puts the question in a simple and clear way when he says that everything the leaders of the International say and do is a matter for which we claim the right to discuss, and to discuss means being able to doubt that something has been said and done wrong, regardless of any prerogative attributed to groups, men, and parties. Is it a question of repeating the holy apologia of freedom of thought and criticism as the right of the individual? No, of course. It is a question of establishing the psychological way of functioning and working of a revolutionary party, which must conquer, not preserve achievements of the past, invade the territories of the enemy, not close off its own with trenches and cordons sanitaires. Therefore, to avoid splits and fractions, and even the mere loss of individual militants, the party has at its disposal the only instrument of the right revolutionary policy, the only psychological activity to prevent degeneration, and then back to the work of studying, sculpting, clarification, and demonstration of the rightness of the programmatic bases. Incidentally, nothing prevents the comrades who are the bearers of misunderstandings of our doctrine from participating in the work of clarification, of sculpting those aspects that require greater clarity, a process that also holds the secret to obtaining a correct response to orders, and also to the lack of orders, when the comrade must act without being able to discuss these with the party organs. 50. Anticipation of future society. A party therefore exists in that it defends not just the perspective of a communist future, but also a doctrine, theorization and systematization of the peculiar characteristics, collective interests, and historical and immediate tasks of the class, and a method of operating, i.e. political activity and organization of the struggle. For us, the party has always been a synthesis of a school of thought and a method of action. All this is irrespective of the size the party has at a given historical moment, be it as a number of members or geographical extent. Even accepting the party's restricted dimensions, we must realize that we are preparing the true party, sound and efficient at the same time, for the momentous period in which the infamies of the contemporary social fabric will compel the insurgent masses to return to the vanguard of history. A resurgence that could once again fail if there is no party, a party that is compact and powerful, rather than inflated in numbers, the indispensable organ of the revolution. Painful as the contradictions of this period are, they can be overcome by drawing the dialectical lessons from the bitter disappointments of times past, and by courageously signaling the dangers that the left warned about, and denounced as they appeared, along with all the insidious forms in which the ominous opportunist infection reveals itself time and time again. Supplementary theses on the historical task, the action, and the structure of the World Communist Party, 1966. As a conclusion, one should not think that the party looks like a traditional army unit, in which every behavior and statement is looked upon with suspicion and subjected to stringent controls. Nor is the party a phalanstery surrounded by impassable walls, suspicious of external contamination, which in reality cannot be avoided, if for no other reason than the succession of comrades of 1,000 origins, and of generations with different backgrounds and experiences. In reality, the common work and the common goal make comrades linked by fraternal consideration. In the party there is a tendency to give life to a strongly anti-bourgeois environment, which, despite the conditioning due to the immersion in this inhuman society, determines an anticipation of the characteristics of the future communist society. The party, as anticipation of the future society, is the synthesis of what a militant feels and lives, while he offers his life to that great upheaval of human history that will make humanity leap, in Engels' meaning, from the kingdom of necessity to the kingdom of freedom.